Good evening, everyone. So there are no notes, and mainly because I really tried to do notes, but if I were to give you notes, it would have been a book. So I just felt it was best to just recommend that you buy a book, okay? Because it was very difficult. I made 3 sets of notes trying to condense things, and the way my brain works is it probably wouldn't, the notes wouldn't be of much help to you, because it's just history that we're going to go through today. So just came up with a title for this, and it's going to be the woman behind the wars. And this is going to be connecting to some of the thoughts that have come out about 10 years and World War II and Fatima. So that's the backdrop to some of these things. But there's so many tentacles. So it's a web of information that it's hard to communicate, you know, all the minute points. So with that said, some things are just going to be generalized. You know, we can go deeper into a lot of things, but they're going to be generalized. And so as we go through things, a gross generalization isn't it isn't the full truth of what I'm trying to say. So today will just be some history, and tomorrow go through some application. So we know that personalities shape nations, right? For example, President Trump, right? His personality, who he is, has shaped and molded the way that America is going just by who he is, right? And it's the same thing with any, even in a home, right? You have an aggressive parent, right? You're going to have that your household is going to go in that direction, right? You have an aggressive teacher in a classroom, right? Those students are going to pick up those traits. And so it's the same thing with the papacy. The personality of a pope, his history, his upbringing, the things he desires also impacts not only the Catholic Church, but it impacts nations. So I want us to have that in mind. And also this is going to, I want to say this first to jog our memory, well, 2 things. The Bolshevik Revolution and Our Lady of Fatima is one, and both of those are 1917. So I have this here on the board as just a waymark to set the backdrop for the rest of this history that goes forward. And also, if we remember when Sister Tess, she brought out how the St. Gallen group, they did not want Pope Benedict. He was not their Pope. And then she stated that they got their man in Pope Francis. So that's what led me to go on into the study, because I was like, how can a group of people determine who is the Pope? How much power does this group have? Why do they have this power, you know? So that's the theme of what I want to go through, get into today. So it's going to be a lot of history, and I'm going to try to portray some of the reasons why some of these popes got into the position that they're in to actually be a pope. So we know the Bolshevik uprising, or the Bolshevik Revolution coming on the scene, and Fatima. These are 2 influences that we can see that have changed the way the world has run. The Bolshevik Revolution, and you see the Soviets rising, and the King of the South, you know, coming on the scene, and the world was forever changed. Fatima coming on the scene, and now the Catholic Church, now she has this, this dogma that she can now push on the people and influence millions of people at one time to make a decision. So under Pope Pius the 11th, we know that he started out pro-fascist, but ended up at the end of his life anti-fascist, and we'll talk about that. So he was before he became Pope, he was the papal nuncio of Catholic Poland. And there was this guy, his name is Luigi Sturzo, and he was a progressive. Forgot to say one thing. As we look at this board, as I talk about the terms conservative, capitalist, autocracy, right wing, etc., these things are going to be linked to Fatima, just generally speaking, because there's some nuances there. And when I talk about liberals, radicals, proletariat, progressive, the left, revolutionary, etc., these are just generally going to be anti-Fatima, right? Or they're going to be the opposite of what the other side is, basically. And so the one side, as we have in blue, this is going to be the United States, who the papacy is riding at one time. For instance, when they were riding Hitler, right back here during this time of Pope Pius the 11th, we know that the Catholic Church was trying to ride Hitler to conquer and have them be the beast that she would ride. But then we know that they changed over to the United States. And so, what I have here under the red is representing the liberal side, where you see the king of the South come on the scene, which is Russia. And then we're going to see how the papacy was trying to ride that beast. So those are the terms that I was talking about. There'd be general terms, but I'm not really trying to hone in on particular points most of the time. So back to this. During the time of Pope Pius XI, there was this guy. His name is Luigi Sturzo, and he was a progressive. And he was the founder and leader of the first Catholic party of Italy. And this was renamed the Christian Democratic Party after World War II. And this was set up as a direct opponent, a direct response to Marxism. And this, to show you the power that the nations also had on the church at this time. And we know that the papacy in 1798, she lost its beast that she was riding, right? She received a deadly wound, right? So she can no longer function how she had functioned for the previous 1,260 years. So Mussolini, he ordered that the Catholic Party of Italy be dissolved. And the woman, she obliged, the papacy obliged. So after this time, the Catholic Church, or the Vatican rather, in 1929, we know that they signed the Lateran Treaty, and they are now working with the fascists, the Hitlers, and the Mussolinis, right? And this is what caused, because we know soon after, we know that Hitler, he's going to attack Russia, right? And there was this strife with these multiple ideologies going on and religions going on. So one of the reasons why Russia now has angst against the Catholic Church is because the Catholic Church, if you're siding with Mussolini and Hitler, and then they're killing Russians, just as generally speaking, the Russians would now have an angst with you if you are now siding with their mortal enemy. So that's just a backdrop to how the papacy is now having issues with Russia. And Russia, under the Bolshevik Revolution, they are anti-religion, period. Right? They don't want anyone ruling over them, right? And this is the the mindset. This is one way that you see atheistic France, which was the king of the South, how they transfer over to being Russia. That same spirit that was in France, it changes over to Russia. So they are anti-religion. They don't want any king ruling over them. They want the people to rule. The papacy, during the same time, they welcome fascism as the opponent of communism. So much so that Pope Pius XI, he called Mussolini the man sent by divine providence. But later on, he ends up warning against Mussolini and Hitler. So the Catholic Church, they're now in this relationship with fascism, and the Pope is even saying this man, he's the one raised up to by divine providence. So in 1939, do I have this right? Okay, this is just a little bit of reading I wanted to do for you. And this is from the book, The Vatican, Moscow, Washington Alliance. And this is just going to jump into how the papacy is being impacted. All right, so this is called a very special document. Pius XI prepared a special testament or document in which he denounced both Hitler and Mussolini and their preparations for war. Having done that, he convoked all the bishops of Italy to Rome. The statement was going to be read by the Pope himself on the 12th of February, 1939. So I want to remember that date, the 12th of February, because it comes back into play. Mussolini and Hitler, who had both heard of it, waited with mounting apprehension. Would the millions of Catholics listen to what the Pope was saying? On the eve of the Second World War, this was of immense importance. Upon its outcome, there might depend the decision Hitler would make as to whether he would or could begin hostilities. Pius XI, however, became very ill. 48 hours before the day he was to make his pronouncement, he was on the brink of death. He begged his doctors to do all in their power to keep him alive until the 12th of February. I want to warn Catholics everywhere not to support Hitler and Mussolini, he kept repeating. It might help to stop the outbreak of the war. Let me live another 48 hours. The doctors did their best. Or did they? Ugly rumors that fascist and Nazi intelligence had a hand in the timely death of the pontiff was never substantiated. The stark fact, however, was that on the morning of the 10th of February, 1939, only 2 days before he could deliver his anti-Nazi, anti-fascist condemnation, the repentant Pius XI died. The mere hint that the Pope might have been murdered in the 20th century sounds absurd. Yet two popes died just as mysteriously less than 200 years ago. In each instance, their deaths occurred on the eve or immediately after they had issued documents similar in importance to that which would have been announced by Pius XI. The two pontiffs, like him, had been caught between extreme political interests and revolutionary subversion. In the case of Pius XI, fascism and Marxism. The dominant issue during the 18th century, of course, was not fascism versus communism, but between their equivalents, the monarchs, who championed contemporary society of their day, and the Jesuits, who were considered the most insidious eroders of the traditional establishment. So he's going to get into some familiar territory that we know about. The Jesuits had come to be regarded as so dangerous that all the traditional forces were arrayed against them. This not so much because they had been adjudged subversives, as they had managed to infiltrate the infrastructures of European society with the same skill, cunning, and efficiency as that of their Marxist counterpart in our day. The result was predictable. The traditional conservative governments asked the Pope to neutralize the subversive Jesuits or else. In a word, he would have to suppress them or face the consequences. The military occupation of Rome was mentioned more than once during these discussions. So now you have people asking the papacy, get rid of the Jesuits, get rid of this one power that's been, kind of doing your dirty work. And that's something we'll see also. Where am I at? Okay. Pope Clement XIII, after endless indecision, postponements, and unconvincing delays, finally decided to do what he had been advised he should do. He capitulated. He made ready a proclamation announcing the suppression of the Jesuit order. It was said that the document was written and was waiting for the day when it was to be made public. To the surprise of all, however, the Pope was suddenly attacked by a mysterious illness. He died on the 12th of February, a coincidence in dates, in 1769 with agonizing, unexplained convulsions. Rumors had it that he had been poisoned. The suddenness of his affliction and the convulsions both pointed to it. The suspicions, however, were never proved. It was suggested by those in the know that the Pope had been made to die before he could publish the announcement of the official suppression of the Jesuit order. The actual document itself vanished and was never seen again. His successor, Pope Clement XIV, gave hints to the effect that certain political forces could not be halted. Prior even to his election, he had made some significant comments. The time has come, he has said, for kings to be obeyed, since their arms stretch far beyond their frontiers and their power can overtop the Alps. Translated into contemporary terms, if we put right-wing dictators for kings, the historical parallel with the 1939 situation is a striking one. Again, in July 1773, Pope Clement XIII wrote an order, Pope Clement XIV wrote an order dissolving the Society of Jesus. This bull was published August 16th of that year. After issuing it, however, the Pope relented in fear of the consequences and tried to withdraw it. Too late, the Spanish ambassador had already dispatched the document by special courier direct to Madrid. The papal brief annihilated the Jesuit order throughout the world, closed its schools, canceled its statutes, its houses were occupied, and its general and other dignitaries were imprisoned. As soon as Clement had signed the brief, he predicted his own end. "I am lost," he was heard to whisper. Afterward, upon hearing the bells of Rome ring, he made another ominous comment. "They are not ringing for saints, but for the dead." He fell immediately into a singular state of agonizing prostration, sunk under the weight of grief. On October 2nd, 1774, he died with great unexplained suffering. His body decomposed so quickly that it was impossible to show his face, as was customary with a deceased pope, and his funeral had to be hastened, omitting the traditional rites. So with this Catholic Party of Italy, the reason why they capitulated to Mussolini is because there was a real threat of your life if you didn't obey the kings of that time. And he gave two historical references to Pope Clement XIII and the 14th and how they died. And we also have a waymarker of February 12th marking the date of death of one pope and the date of that same pope who wanted to turn away and say, oh, I changed my mind about fascism. I'm going to say they're wrong. Then he was killed, and that document was supposed to be released February 12th. So that's just showing how how the death of, or how the feelings and the personal interests of a pope can also play a role in what he wants to do. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so Pope Pius, he also snubbed a visit by Hitler in 1938 prior to him wanting to issue this condemnation of fascism. All right, and he also told Hitler that the only way that he would be allowed into the Vatican is that if he apologized for the atrocities he had committed against Catholics. So this Pope, he was really trying to protect his people to a degree. So we know it's just hard for me to say things like that. I mean, they're still people at the end of the day, but when you realize this is Satan's #1 institution on earth, and to think about them actually caring at all for their people is just, it's kind of an oxymoron. But as a human being, he really cared about the Catholics, his people during that time, in spite of what his, satanic goals were. All right, so Pope Pius XII, he was Pope Pius XI's Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State for the Vatican, this is like the top echelon. It's like if you're the head of the CIA or I'm not sure if the others, maybe State Department. So that's the position that Pope Pius XII had. And Pope Pius XII, he was anti-communist, like no other pope has been. He was a true blue pope, and his belief during this time was that Russia was the enemy, and he was pro-Fatima. And we know, according to the Our Lady of Fatima doctrine and dogma, they had to eliminate Russia, and so he was pushing this very hard. So much so that the revolutionaries or the liberals that were also inside of the Vatican at this time, because Pope Pius XII's position was so strong, he prevented those revolutionaries from even having an ear to the Pope. So the Pope basically never even heard the other side of the story, which would have been this revolutionary side, this pro-red side. So we didn't talk about that, but the Vatican and Pope Pius XII, he also helped, and I tried to indicate this here, he helped Hitler come to power. And you also had two other popes that were, they were on the other side of the aisle within the Vatican. And these two are the popes, they weren't popes at this time, but Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul VI, they were also in the Vatican during this time, and they were on the other side of the aisle. So an interesting note about the mindset of the Vatican during this time of Pope Pius XI and XII. This was Pope Pius XI. He said this. He said, "I swear and promise to honor." I can't remember if they signed this. Yeah, okay. Vatican and Hitler signed a concordat in which the church swore allegiance to the Nazi regime. "I swear and promise to honor the legally constituted Nazi government. I will endeavor to avoid all detrimental acts which might endanger it." And this was documented in Article 16 of that concordat in 1934. So the Vatican during this time became communist in word and in deed within a domestic sphere, and anti-Russian in the international. So like on the political field, they were anti-Russian. But on the religious field, they could not be atheists, right? And so we're seeing you can see a connection there to, they're still having this war with the King of the South. All right, and okay, then Pope Pius, one of the reasons why he, as I had read, one of the reasons why they began to back away from following the fascist leaders is because they started seeing this infighting, right? And it wasn't really in harmony. Mussolini and Hitler agreed, but they both kind of had their own agendas as well. They both wanted to rule the world. So Germany was anti-communist, and to Pius, Bolshevik Russia was out to revolutionize the world with this atheistic anti-Christian ideology, but it was also using its military might. So the Vatican, they can battle you on ideologies, right, as they were battling Protestants, as they were battling the Orthodox Church. But then Russia comes along, and not only do they have their atheistic beliefs, but they are a military power. So if they have a military power that's taking over the world, the Vatican is like, well, I need me some arms as well. And so that's why the Vatican was willing to enter into these alliances with these other nations. All right, and so Pope Pius, he saw, another thing that he saw was, as Hitler began to grow, and we know that Hitler, he was kind of ignoring the Pope more and more, and being his own man, the papacy saw that they were losing their free reign to control the people. And so though Pope Pius wanted, he could not let the world go red and be Russian, but he saw that the world was now going black with Hitler and his regime. So they had to make a change. So Pope Pius the 11th, he was killed. And during this time, you have Stalin, he's trying to impact who the next pope will be. And I thought this was interesting with the thoughts that we have on collusion and all of this. It isn't a new thing in history, because from Pope Pius the 12th, before he became pope, the Russians were taking many, many bits and pieces of information and storing these things in a register so that they could have all the information on every single facet of the world that's going on. So much so that the previous, as you notice here, I have these red marks because these three popes, they are pro-Russian popes. It said, at least in this book here, that they even had details down to, he's been a little bit facetious, but details to what color socks the popes put on day to day. So they knew. They determined, I think it was Pope John the 23rd, they said he liked polenta, right? And polenta was like it was the peasant food, right? It was what the common class would eat, and polenta is like fantastic food for me, but it would be the comparison of if somebody's eating, great, it's totally horrible, but escargot versus French fries from McDonald's, right? So it would be the common people food. They took these things into account and had this as documented information that they could use to build a case for why this person should be the next pope. And it was just amazing how much information they gathered. Russia, everything they could gather, they gathered every bit of information. Nothing was insignificant to them. So I thought that was pretty cool. And it's been that same way, at least as far back as I went, since Pope Pius the 12th. It's just been truly amazing. So now during the time of Pope Pius the 12th, have Russia failing here, because Russia failed to get a pro-Russian pope into the papal office, because they did not account for the personality. They didn't realize how serious Pope Pius the 12th was about Fatima. This guy was a true blue. You cannot deter him. He was, he excommunicated anybody that that voted for anybody communist. So I forget the wording. It was excommunication, but No, I can't think of it. But basically, he excommunicated anybody in any of the European countries that voted communist. So the people began to be scared to even vote, right? Because if you vote and then you get excommunicated from the church is your life, right? The church is everything. And that was the mindset of the people. So Russia did not truly estimate, well, they underestimated the personality of Pope Pius XII. So basically what this means is that things can backfire, right? So for instance, during the time of Pope Pius XI, they set up the worker priest movement, right? And they set up the worker priest movement because though the popes were looked at as staying inside of the Vatican, and if you stay inside of the Vatican, you're this entity that can't be touched, right? And so because the Pope himself couldn't be touched, they lost connection with the worker priests, the people who were out in the field, right? Because the Pope wasn't relatable. He was a king and you're a peasant, right? So they instituted this worker priest focus so that they could reach those people. And this was instituted by Pope Pius the 11th. No, actually Pope Pius the 12th, I'm sorry. Let me make sure I got that right. Okay, so they wanted to woo the proletariat. But now the worker priests, what was interesting is that it said that they took the Gospels in one hand, but then they took the banned book. I can't remember who wrote it. Das Kapital. Does anybody know who wrote that? It was Hitler wrote that? Das? Okay, yeah. Okay, so they had the Gospels in one hand, but Das Kapital in the other. And this is something that doesn't sit right. It's metaphorically speaking. They had these two. Karl Marx. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. Yes, I was thinking of Karl Marx. You said, okay, yeah. Karl Marx, yeah. I bet I got it wrote down here. And all this history is new to me, so thank you. I'm learning all this stuff. So the worker priests, they would have the Gospels in one hand, Das Kapital in the other, and they're two conflicting things. And so the worker priests, they would have the Gospels, right? They're like, I'm Catholic, but then they would have this revolutionary mindset going. So that was, you cannot have a revolutionary mindset if you're a king in your people. You do not need revolution. You need to keep them under control. So so basically they had to put that down, right? But you have people who were within the Vatican and they appreciated this worker priest mindset because they were revolutionaries themselves. And this would be the future popes, John Paul the 23rd and Paul the 6th. So people within the Vatican, you can see, are supporting this worker priest mindset, but this focus originated with previous popes who were actually anti-revolutionary. So that thing that Pope Pius XII instituted kind of backfired on them later on in the future. So these worker priests, as they began to go out and have a little bit more, gumption and this revolutionary spirit, they began to be disciplined by the local bishops and cardinals. So I already stated he excommunicated Catholics who were pro-communist. What else? Okay, so getting down to, and I'll go back a little bit into it. So at his death, Pope Pius the 12th death, the cardinals split into two blocks. Conservatives, which would be pro-USA, anti-Russian, and progressives who wanted to abandon the Vatican-USA relationship. And the conservative right-wing leader was Cardinal Ottavani, and the progressives, the left wing, was led by a group of moderates. And these moderates were Cardinal Agagian, who was supported by the Kremlin, and Cardinal Roncalli. And Cardinal Roncalli ended up being This was Pope John the 23rd. So the moderates, so there was a split at this Vatican conclave. Just lost my spot, I'm sorry. Okay, so Pope Pius said this on his, he said this till his dying day. He said, "It is inconsistent to wish to sit at the table of God and at the table of his enemies." So Pope Pius was unwilling to have any relationship at all with any pro-Russian anything. He was a hard-nosed. While at the same time, Pope John the 23rd declared just the opposite. And he said this, he said, "Meetings between believers and those who do not believe can be occasion for discovering truth and paying homage to it." So this was, you see, this willingness to go against what the traditional mindset of Catholicism was. And this was the new Catholicism. This was a Catholicism that was willing to go in a different direction than what the previous the 1,000 years of papal rule had been. They went against that mindset. And they went against this mindset because of the current status of the world. If you have Russia coming up and Russia is now having more power and you don't want to come out on the losing end, right? So you used to be over here, and though you have, and granted, it's an institution, but it's individuals at the same time, right? Just like any church. So you have the direction that they should be going, but you can have an individual that can steer the course another way. And this is what Pope John was doing. He saw that he would be, granted, he, forget which country, can't remember what, oh yeah, he was German. He was the former papal, no. That's the wrong pope. Oh, I don't know where he's from. Can't remember. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead in my notes because of time. But he basically saw that I want to get on the winning team here. And that's what the woman does, right? She's going to ride the beast that is strong, just in general terms, glossing over a lot of history. But she's going to ride the beast who is strong. And Russia, as she was coming up, she was looking like a formidable beast to ride. And so was the United States. So something interesting, in this book, The Vatican, Washington, Moscow Alliance, he points to a triumvirate of Pope Pius, the Dulles brothers, and Archbishop Spellman. Now, the Dulles brothers were made up of John Foster Douglas, who was the U.S. Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles, and he was the head of the CIA. So in this, and they had what they called a hotline to the Vatican during the time of Pope Pius the 12th. And so as Pope Pius was trying to get things done, he could communicate directly to the head of the Secretary of State and the head of the CIA and get things done the way he wanted to get them done. But while he's doing this, and you have other radicals or liberals or people with this proletariat mindset who came from, as they said about Pope John the 23rd, he was of the worker stock. He grew up on a farm. He had a simple life, right? And so he didn't have this stately mindset. And so you had these two conflicting ideas. So as Pope Pius, as he's pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope, other people are like, wait a minute, you know, this isn't the way we should be going. And so that's just the reality of the situation. So, okay, so communist Russia, they were the main winner of World War II because it had millions of liberated communists in liberated Europe and Catholic communists who wanted to bring socialism to the Vatican. So as you had Germany trying to take you out, and then you had a papacy that was tied to Germany, and they're doing all these atrocities and killing millions of Catholics, and it's turning people away from that mindset. You now had really a fresh supply of people that would just get on board with the prevailing power of the day, and that was Russia, as they began to become this superpower. So the people who Pope Pius had silenced during this time, once he dies, guess what they can do? They come back to the fore, right? Especially as they're seeing, Russia come on the scene. I know I'm glossing over some of that history. We're not being totally pinpoint on the timing, but that's just the broad sweep. So this, and they call it the Bolshevik dragon that was emerging. All right, so these communist parties were springing up throughout Europe. Okay, I don't need to say that. Okay, talk about Joseph Stalin just a little bit. So Joseph Stalin, he was basically lived during the same time as Pope Pius XII, and he prepared for the removal of Pope Pius by an intangible weapon. And by an intangible weapon, it's the papacy. They're the most, well, we know they dominate American Congress, right? Or they have, or is it just the Senate? I can't remember, but they dominate American politics, right? And I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. So they dominate American politics, and they're so pervasive. They can go where a typical diplomat can't go, because the Catholic could be right here in this room, right? Whereas if you're a Republican, so to speak, your political backdrop or your political beliefs in the Catholic mind doesn't really describe who you are. It's always religion first, then the state, right? You obey what the church says, and then secondarily, you obey what your country says. If your country says anything contrary to what Catholicism teaches, you go with what Catholicism teaches. So Stalin knew this. So the best way to counteract a pope and have the power over these millions of people is to put a pope in place that believes opposite of what the enemy pope believed. And so this is what Joseph Stalin tried to do. And he was very savvy. He was a former seminary student, and they called him a current professional atheist who was well versed in theological thinking. He had a lot of dealings with the Orthodox Church, and so he understood how your political, he understood how your personal opinions, no matter if you're an ecclesiastic that is high or low on the echelon, how he understood how they worked. And so he can manipulate them. And so the number one thing you can do if you want to have control over millions of people is to put a pope into place, and actually billions of people, put a pope into place that believes like you believe. And so that's what Stalin was trying to do. He gathered information about their personal opinions, their habits, physical dispositions. Like I said, they knew about what they ate, especially Pope John the 23rd. They knew he was polenta. They said he had peasant hands. All these kinds of things. So they were very, very observant. And another thing he knew, which I thought was very interesting, about Pope Pius XII, he actually created new dogmas. And I forget, this one dogma he proclaimed was the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. And this was something, he had this vision by himself. Nobody else was there. And he stated this to one of his diplomats or whatever, and this diplomat went out and shared it with the world. But his personal vision that he had, he said, this is what happened. And because the Pope said it, this now became dogma. And once this thing became dogma, millions of people said, Our Lady of Fatima, this is another piece to the puzzle. We must basically take down Russia. Russia's the enemy. So actually that's what revisionist thinking, right? Because I threw a lot into that one bucket. But yeah, so I jumped ahead. I jumped to present day, thinking about what they're thinking. So Pope John the 23rd. So now this is where Russia gets its man right here, Pope John the 23rd. And they say he was the first pink pope. Now they call him pink pope because Russia is red, the papacy is white, and the middle is going to be pink, right? So he abandoned America without regrets, right? And this was something interesting. They went from the Catholic Church being this, I mean, think about St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican, these beautiful buildings, this kingly, Jesus is a king, right? He's going to rule. You're going to have a mansion. This mindset, Jesus wants to bless you, right? But what Pope John did, he said, well, wasn't Jesus a carpenter? Right? Didn't his mother probably sew men clothes? Right? Didn't they have a simple life? And so this was the mindset that they would push on the people. And so they would preach, they would push two different types of Christ, a white collar Christ and a blue collar Christ. And these two types of Christ that they pushed, it related to more of the proletariat more people were in those positions than they were kings, right? And especially we have this Bolshevik mindset, this revolutionary mindset of no king is going to rule over me. This fit the mindset of many people throughout the world. So he disapproved of the cult of Our Lady of Fatima, and he said a really cool statement. I have it somewhere. But basically he said, Our Lady of Fatima, he said, you can't, I don't have it in these notes. But he said a really cool statement about Our Lady of Fatima. If I remember, I'll bring it tomorrow. But he broke from the past alliance with the USA, and he took an internal, honest look of the Vatican on the world stage. And he said, okay, you know what? Russia is the power we need to go with. But they also, skipping through a lot of history, Russia also began to note how this pro-red, this pro-Russian mindset, if it got too far, they were going to lose control and lose power. So they had to make some concessions, make some changes. So there's a lot of good stuff there. All right, so Pope Paul VI, Pope John, when he got into the papacy, he was very old. I think he was 77 years old. So they thought he was going to be like a pope that just kind of kept the seat warm a little bit. But the Soviets knew that this guy, he was serious, but they didn't believe in him a whole lot. And who they really wanted, instead of Pope John here, they wanted Pope Paul. They wanted him to be here, but Pope Paul, he didn't have his, he wasn't a cardinal during this time in 1958, because he had rejected the cardinal's hat from Pope Pius. And so because of that, at this point, he could not be selected to the papacy. So this was the man they really wanted. And actually, Cardinal Agagin, I don't know how you say his name, 3 G's in his name. And they really wanted him, but he was too far to the left. So even the Soviets was like, nah, you gonna mess things up. It has to be it has to be something workable, because we want revolution, but we don't want revolution like that, right? So they wanted Pope Paul to be here, but he couldn't because he wasn't he wasn't a cardinal yet. So guess what Pope John did within these first 5 years? I believe within the first year that he was elected Pope. What he did is he made Pope Paul VI a cardinal, because he's thinking, I want to continue on with this pro-Russian mindset. So he was very old when he was elected. And he passed in 1963, and this is when Pope Paul VI, he was pro-Russian, he was a radical, and this was the first pope to address the United Nations. He was more to the left than even Pope John was. And as we talked about how these popes started to push a worker Christ, a white-collar Christ, a blue-collar Christ versus this kingly Christ, he donned a miner's hat and went to where some of these people worked at. And so this really meant a lot to those people, even so much so that even they started training nuns in basic crafts and skills. So, and they did this because this would allow them to penetrate the working classes of people. Yes, very smart. So he worked in the Vatican. He was a Secretary of State, which was, the Vatican Secretary of State is equivalent to the U.S. State Department, Pentagon, and the CIA combined. So I forgot about the Pentagon. So these, the positions that the Secretary of State has is super powerful. It's like I have all the ruling positions minus the president, and the president is the Pope. So very powerful. He was called the Pro-Red Secretary of State, and he was the Archbishop of Milan from 1954 to 1963. So this is when he refused the cardinal's hat from Pope Pius, and in doing this, it really ingratiated him with the other pro-communist people, this liberal radical mindset. And Pope Pius shipped him off to Milan. So this is like if you were the head of the CIA and they want to keep you, because they're not really just going to fire you, because that'd just be too much of a show. So they keep you in the White House, but they basically make you a janitor. So you can say, I'll work at the White House, but you're not the Secretary of State, you're the janitor in the White House. So it's that's what he was attempting to do. So and so what we'll get to tomorrow is we'll talk about how little bit about how the USA failed here with this election of this Pope, and then Pope John Paul II, then the St. Gallen group, and then say a little bit about Francis. This is more of the stuff that I don't know a whole lot of history about, because it's like unfolding before our eyes, so it's a little bit harder to put my finger on things. But I think that is it for today. Shall we pray? Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be here, Lord, and Lord, I thank you for the history that is documented, Lord, for your people to see that, Lord, this collusion on many levels, Lord, it's clear, Lord, that Russia is involved with collusion. And Lord, we ask that you would open our eyes to see how these things are applicable to today. And even 2016, Lord, we would like to have clarity. We would like to see these things documented in history, because we know prophecy and history must agree. So we ask that you will bless us, Lord, and give us understanding. Lord, we pray and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.